The most famous monument in the world. The pulsating heart of the Roman Empire, where heroes were made and broken. 2,000 years of human drama have left their mark on the stone, brick and mortar of this iconic arena. Underneath the grime are hidden details, coming to light only now, as a controversial renovation project returns the Colosseum to its ancient glory. This is Rome, the eternal city, the center of the greatest empire of the ancient world. At its heart was the Colosseum. 2,000 years after it was built, this iconic monument is in dire need of repair. Through a unique public-private partnership, the Colosseum is getting a historic facelift.
I think that beyond being a pleasure, it is also a duty to do these things. The Colosseum is a symbol that represents Italy. It is a monument that everyone worldwide loves.
Today, restorers carefully strip away centuries of grime to reveal the Colosseum in its original colors. The scaffolding stretches to the top of the imposing monument. A lift takes workers up 55 meters to one of the most stunning views of the city.
Beneath this layer of dirt, taking away and freeing the monument and making it more beautiful aesthetically, there are still many things to discover.
Rome is the most famous city in the world. Millions of tourists each year come to visit the Vatican, heart of the Catholic faith, and admire Rome's ancient ruins.
This monument fascinates because of its uninterrupted history. People came here continuously, except for a few periods, a continual use, a continual transformation.
Although the Forum was ancient Rome's political center, it was the Colosseum that Romans loved, where the emperors paid for quality entertainment to win the hearts of the citizens. Construction began around 70 AD and ended 10 years later. 80,000 spectators watched gladiatorial games every day for 100 days to inaugurate the arena, a celebration fit for the greatest of all amphitheaters.
Bread and circuses. Give the people bread and circuses, a full stomach and something to look at. They will never have a revolution. That is something the leaders of Rome understood perfectly.
The seismic activity and pollution of a modern city with a population of 6 million is taking its toll on the Colosseum, the tallest building in Rome, apart from the great marble monument to Italian unification in nearby Piazza Venezia. Traffic in the heart of Rome is a constant threat to the ancient monuments. In a 3-year, €25 million restoration project, scientists, engineers and artisans are meticulously cleaning and repairing the massive monument and preserving the historic arena for future generations. Cinzia Conti is in charge of the massive task, which involves using the tiniest hammers and brushes to carefully chip, wash and repair grime and damage that threatens the structure.
The surface of the Colosseum is 22,452 square meters. It is an old monument, but it is in good shape. It is solid. The organization of the construction site requires that we see what there is underneath the soft deposited layer.
One man who is often in the public eye has taken the fate of the Colosseum to heart and battled through layers of Italian bureaucracy to preserve it. The owner of luxury shoe and leatherwear brand Tod's, Diego della Valle, has put his name on the line to restore the Colosseum and, in the process, realized a dream that goes back to his youth.
I saw the Colosseum as a young boy. We went on a school trip and we left this small town in a bus and we arrived in Rome after a very long trip. And when I saw the Colosseum, it was this giant thing and I never forgot it. Every time I go to Rome and pass the Colosseum on my way to the airport or somewhere else, I see it and it pleases me that we are able to lend a hand and save something so emblematic.
Across Italy, major monuments are being restored with the help of discreetly branded sponsorship.
You have a lot of people that say, I want to contribute, and ultimately, I'd like to be recognized for making that contribution. And this is what happened in ancient Rome as well, except for they really put their names on the monuments.
Critics warn against seeing these gestures as pure altruism. In exchange for his €25 million contribution, Della Valle gets the right to use the logo of the monument on his products for years to come, and print his company's logo on the back of the Colosseum's entry tickets, marketing and advertising potentially worth millions. It is not a given, however, that he will do so.
It is important to do it for the country and get nothing in exchange, because it is a strong symbolic gesture. In the Anglo-Saxon world, those who do this sort of operation, sometimes they have sponsorship, or sometimes they study the mechanisms for how it can be useful for their group. Normal things that I think are good to do. But in our case, it was just a case of, we are Italians. Here we are. Our country gave us a lot. We are proud to be Italians and happy to help the Colosseum.
The Colosseum may be the greatest amphitheatre of the Romans, but it was not the first. Gladiatorial combat was held at least 250 years beforehand, in the arenas in Capua and Paestum. The breathtaking amphitheatre of Verona in northern Italy is also older than the Colosseum by 40 years. It has been completely restored and rendered safe for entertainment and public use today.
C'era stato qualcosa d'altro dal punto di vista degli anfiteatri.
There were other amphitheatres before the Colosseum. The Verona Arena is interpreted from a historical standpoint as a step in the evolution of the amphitheatre, and it was important for the construction of the Flavian amphitheatre, which is the biggest of the Roman world.
Grande del mondo romano.
These ancient amphitheatres, incredibly all built before Rome's arena, shed light on the past, present and future of the Colosseum. The Colosseum undergoes the most comprehensive facelift of its history, using simple yet revolutionary, non-invasive techniques. Dr. Darius Aria is the director of the American Institute for Roman Culture and has directed excavations of ancient Rome.
How do you clean the Colosseum? Well, right now the exterior is being cleaned with manual labor, elbow grease, but the main factor that's applied is water. Not chemicals, but just water with a nebulizer. And that ultimately is going to loosen up and remove the pollution that's secreted on the surface. Then you're brushing it out. Then you see what kind of consolidation you need to do. Are there chips and cracks? Yes, there are. You fill them in. So ultimately then it's a bigger study, a larger study on the effects of time on the Colosseum.
L'acqua non deve essere gettata sulla superficie.
The water should not be sprayed on the Colosseum, but rather nebulized. The mist that is created produces a concentrated humidity that lasts over time, for approximately 4 hours, allowing the layers of dirt to slide down.
In the sections that have been through the arduous cleaning process, experts are finding amazing architectural details that shed new light on how the Romans used the Colosseum. For the first time, thanks to the scaffolding, restorers can see up close the holes where bronze shields were fixed, as well as traces of the plinths of the marble statues that decorated the facade.
Another interesting element emerged on the second and third floors, where we found traces of the places where the statues were that decorated the whole facade. The delicate and prudent cleaning reveal this rubric. These traces of red were applied in the space inside the number sculpted on every arch. The visitors had access to the 80 archways. Each one had a card to enter. Entry was free.
2,000 years ago, Romans entered through these very same arches to watch the gladiatorial games. Federica Guidi is an archaeologist and expert on the life of the gladiator in ancient Rome, where the emperors had perfected the best way to pacify their public.
The Romans loved the games, whether they were rich or poor. And the proof that they loved them so much, they were passionate about them, and that it was more than just a spectacle, is that the games spread. Not only the gladiatorial games, but games in general, throughout the entire Roman Empire.
But the origins of this popular Roman tradition reach back much farther in the annals of history, all the way to the great Greek epic, the Iliad.
It is Homer, whoever he was, who for the first time tells us about a series of funeral games that the Greek warriors held to honor one of their fallen comrades, Patroclus. The champions engage in combat, boxing and races, but at the first blood or sign of supremacy of one over the other, the fight or the competition stops. We would see that in Italy, things would be different.
Giorgio Franchetti operates a school of gladiators in Rome and is considered an expert in the ancient games.
In 264 BC, in a Rome that was at the height of its empire, in great territorial, commercial and military expansion, Titus Livy and Valerius Maximus, the great Roman historians, tell us that the funeral of an important politician, Julius Pera, was celebrated in the cattle market, and his children decided to honor his funeral pyre by having 3 couples of gladiators fight. And this was the first evidence of gladiatorial combat in Rome.
Gladiatorial combat to the death increased in popularity exponentially. Every time a great Roman died, more and more elaborate funeral rites, games, and spectacles were organized.
As the games became more important and became an event that the public followed and looked forward to, the organization became more and more expensive. Also, because it became an important investment for all those who wanted to embark on a political career. They were a good electoral campaign investment.
The organizers of these grand shows were called lanistas, and they rented their services for the most elaborate events, which were wildly popular with the Roman public and a prime political opportunity.
In 46 BC, Julius Caesar, to inaugurate his forum, Caesar's Forum, employed 320 gladiatorial pairs, though obviously there is no funeral to celebrate, and by now they had completely forgotten about the sacred funerary aspect of this ritual.
The greater the enthusiasm for this bloodthirsty spectacle, the more need there was to create adequate urban spaces for such games. Rome did not yet have a place for permanent games, and constantly had to erect costly wooden seating.
It was not possible in the late Republican period to keep the structures for public entertainment standing. They had to be dismantled, and there was a reason. because they could be places of assembly of many people and therefore dangerous.
Though the thriving cities of Capua and Pompeii already had permanent arenas, senators and consuls in Rome were hesitant to allow too many gladiators in the city at once.
Caesar himself at a certain point, Julius Caesar, had 5,000 gladiators, and they told him, you can't keep them in Rome, so he moved them to Capua, to the training grounds of Capua. But Capua is very close to Rome.
This is the ancient Etruscan city of Capua, second only to Rome and Carthage in strategic importance at the time, and connected directly to Rome with the most important military highway, called the Via Appia. Here, for the first time, the two semicircles of a theatre were built facing each other around a central, sand-covered stage. In Latin, arena means sand. Ida Gennarelli is the director of the archaeological site that houses the remains of Italy's most ancient amphitheatre, the second largest after the Colosseum.
The Campagna Amphitheatre of Capua was built by the veterans' colony of Capua in the 1st century AD. It has an enormous arena, 164 by 144, and it is built on 3 layers. These arches are made of travertine, and there is an attic with windows.
For thousands of spectators to all be able to see the show, they had to be seated around it and upwards, as in a football stadium of today. It was an enormous feat of engineering at the time.
The construction techniques of the Romans are well known. They built everything: aqueducts, amphitheatres, roads. So they were great engineers, and obviously they put all their professionalism into the amphitheatre, thanks as well to the slaves they had at their disposal. So you have to imagine the thousands of people that were required to build this huge amphitheatre.
Capua was also the first permanent arena built of bricks, mortar and stone, with richly decorated interiors and seating, setting the style of Roman arenas for centuries. While Capua's arena is the oldest and is no longer used for entertainment, the amphitheatre of Verona, far to the north of Italy, is an example of an arena that still functions as a place of entertainment.
It is a very large structure that held up to 30,000 spectators that staged great events, both gladiator against gladiator, but mostly gladiator against animal, either ferocious or exotic.
The peaceful period after the rise of the Emperor Augustus saw great expansion and new colonies, and with them the spread of gladiatorial games in arenas, by now the hallmark of the Roman Empire. These epigraphs tell the stories of famous Roman gladiators, citing them even by name.
For example, one was called Generous because he was very brave, and he died after fighting in many battles here in Verona, but he died invictus, without ever having been defeated. Another was called Pardon because he moved in a way that was very feline.
When the gladiator lost, there was this sign on the part of the magistrate or the emperor, and the gladiator would be killed. There are those who say the thumbs down sign that has been cited very few times by the sources, that it might have been a gesture like this. Or there are those who say that the thumb went like this for the sign of the slitting of the throat of the gladiator. But the fact is that it is the emperor who had the power to decide the life or death of the defeated gladiator. And they had their throats slit right there, in front of everybody.
The amphitheatre also had entrances for the different social classes, as well as separate doors for the winners and losers.
The two entrances of the arena were the two main doors. The triumphant door that faced the city where the parades came into the arena, and the door of the losers, the Libitina door.
The intermediate corridors where spectators moved through to their places were called vomitoria, and they were richly decorated, as evidenced by the original pieces housed in the Capua Museum.
There was this illusion that they were all equal. I could be next to someone who was important. I could be no one or someone, all there together rooting for our favourites. It was a great social equaliser, but only apparently, because when the show was over, everyone went back to being what they were before.
Under the early empire, only certain officers could organise games, at their own expense. The number of gladiators was limited to 120 per exhibition, except, of course, those promoted by the emperor, who could do what he liked. Every time one of Augustus's successors needed a surge in popularity, he took gladiatorial combat to new heights. The arenas were the venue, and they too had to be spectacular. The Colosseum is still standing today, but centuries of grime have taken their toll. The painstaking renovation work is revealing the original colour of the Colosseum, as it might have looked to the Romans who 2,000 years ago attended the first gladiatorial combat here.
This is really the fulcrum of this city, and it continues to be. And there is a destiny to this place, to be the place of combat, also ideological.
Indeed, there is fierce debate over how to regulate private sponsorship of national heritage sites. In this case, the most famous monument in the world.
It needed to be restored. The mayor of Rome called me and asked for help, and we made ourselves available, and we are very proud to do it.
2 years and several culture ministers after the initial proposal, renovation finally got off the ground in 2014, but not without obstacles.
Worries? Frustration? No. Displeasure at seeing that sometimes small men put at risk the reputation of something so important for the prestige of the country, but not a big deal. Small men, small problems.
2,000 years ago, the Emperor Vespasian set out to build the greatest amphitheatre of all time, a place where enthusiastic crowds were treated to the gory spectacle of duels to the death and the merciless massacre of wild animals.
The massacre was most of all of animals, so much so that even Cicero in the second half of the 1st century BC complained that in the Orient they were having trouble finding panthers. This is the sign of how much the wild animals were almost going extinct.
But exactly who were the gladiators?
In the beginning, it was prisoners of war who entertained the Roman public in the arena. It is not by chance that the first armour gladiators wore were called Samnite, Gallic and Thracian, named after the enemies of Rome.
Each type of gladiator could be recognized in the amphitheatre from afar by their helmet and armour.
This is a typical Thracian helmet. It is perfectly recognizable by this crest that ends in an animal head, unique and special to the Thracian helmet.
They were prisoners of war, criminals. Some even volunteered. They were desperate Romans who signed contracts that were legally binding and of set duration in hopes of fighting their way out of debt despite becoming social outcasts. But they were also famous.
Mettevano la loro vita appunto nelle mani.
They put their lives at risk in combat, and in exchange, they received ambivalent sentiment, a feeling of formal disgust. Oh my God, how disgusting it is to become a gladiator! How horrible! But in fact, we know that gladiators were heroes. They were looked up to like today's football stars, like today's celebrities. So on the one side, they were despised and disapproved of as men who sold themselves. On the other hand, there was admiration. There is this ambivalence that is constant in the games of the Romans.
The fact is, they became slaves, even if they were free men. It was viewed as being wrong. In fact, as soon as they entered as new recruits and were brought into the training grounds that would embrace them as new athletes for a month, 3 months, 5 months, however long they were under contract for, the first thing that was done to them is they were whipped.
In the arena, you are a hero. In the arena, all eyes are on you. But outside, you are a slave. In the end, you are someone lowering yourself for money and doing something degrading.
Their popularity was undeniable, especially, it is said, among the high society Roman women who attended the games. The gladiators were strong, athletic, and, according to legend, very desirable.
The women desired them. They thought they were beautiful. The high society women from good families ran away from home for them.
In the training grounds of Pompeii, they found, among all these male skeletons, a skeleton of a woman. They say she was a rich matron who had paid to come to see her favourite gladiator, something that was documented. There are those who say with a smile, in any case, she died happy.
Roman matrons dumped their husbands and children and boarded a ship with a group of itinerant gladiators.
But gladiators were not just male. Female slaves and prisoners also fought.
The gladiator women weren't allowed to fight as equals, though. They were made to fight over the lunch hour with the dwarves and the others, while the spectators waited for the real entertainment, the real protagonists, the men.
Despite the fame and fortune some might achieve, most gladiators' lives were hard and dangerous. As the gladiators became celebrities, the men who managed them became rich and powerful. These manager agents were called lanistas. Until the time of the Emperor Domitian, they invested in and trained whole gladiatorial teams.
A good lanista, a good manager, is one who knew how to read the human qualities he had in front of him. You are skinny and fast. You will be a retiarius, armed lightly with a trident and a net. You are big and muscular. I will make you a Thracian. I will turn you into a Mamilian, heavily armed but able to sustain frontal assaults.
The gladiators were assessed, fed a rich diet, and then specially trained, not always with real arms, however. The scene was far different in front of the Roman public inside the arena, where gladiators were outfitted for each type of battle or game.
These are called clemides, these high ones, but there were other shapes too. For example, these that were called ocrias. So many kinds of swords and shields, all of different sizes and each to be given to a specific gladiator. Training involved using wooden swords, such as these, the ludis, because they were considered safe weapons. They couldn't cause wounds. And also because, let's not forget, that these people weren't the creme de la creme. So leaving them with weapons at their disposal was not the wisest choice.
The Spartacus revolt, however, showed just how vulnerable society could be to these professional mercenaries. Spartacus was an ex-soldier from the Roman legions who was condemned to slavery and retained to become a gladiator here at the gladiator school of Capua. In 73 BC, he led a slave uprising against the Roman Republic, which quickly spread across the entire south of Italy.
It took 2 years for the Senate to take the problem of the rebellious gladiators of Capua seriously, because they tended to underestimate them, so as not to give them the satisfaction of sending the best legions against them, because it would mean admitting they were stronger than they should have been. But they were.
The impressive underground labyrinth of the Capua arena has only become accessible for viewing recently. This is where gladiators and animals were kept before entering the arena. Trapdoors and elevators allowed scenery and animals to be lifted onto the wooden stage, which was covered in sand. Here, doctors would stitch up wounded gladiators. The smell of death infested the tiny corridors. Canals of water ran underneath to wash away the blood and waste.
These were the cellars. This is where they managed the stage machinery to marvel the public. Trapdoors, pulleys and planks, where the beasts, gladiators, machines, rocks, everything that could enthrall the Roman public was brought onto the stage.
However, not all combat was to the death. It was in the Lanistas' interest to keep the gladiators alive as long as possible.
The armour and the components of the equipment were always studied to balance the offence and the defence so that the combat would last as long as possible.
Not just the emperors and magistrates decided the fate of the gladiators, but also the Lanistas, who acted as referees in the games. Frescoes and epigraphs of ancient gladiatorial rites recall there was often pressure from the public to spare popular gladiators' lives.
It would be crazy to go and kill a gladiator, a favourite of the crowds, when the crowd is asking for the gladiator's life to be spared.
Today, the only form of fight to the death still practiced is the bullfight, a spectacle that still thrives in Spain and the Spanish-speaking world. Behind the scenes, the younger toreros prepare their magnificent clothes, called traje de luz, or robes of light, while the more senior matador prepares mentally to kill the bull. It is an ancient rite and not without risk, both for the toreros, the picadors, and of course, the matador. The killing technique is the gauge of the matador's value, just as the ancient Romans judged the valor of a gladiator by his capacity to escape and deliver death. The arenas of 2,000 years ago guaranteed a unique form of entertainment, a magnificent show with complex scenery, exotic animals, music, and often an unforgettable bloodbath. Rome, however, was the last city to get its own arena, and building it was a special feat of engineering.
The construction of the Colosseum was an enormous undertaking. There were already several large amphitheaters being built throughout Italy at the time, but this one had to be the biggest, this one had to be the best.
Building this mega arena in the very heart of Rome was more than a triumph of engineering. It was an astute political ploy on the part of an ambitious dynasty of emperors who took the Roman Empire to new heights of power. Nearly 500 years after the earliest gladiatorial combats were recorded, Emperor Vespasian, first of the Flavian dynasty, had a unique opportunity to build an arena in the heart of the empire's capital city, but also to destroy the memory of his predecessor, Nero. The city's geography favored his plan, The Rome of Julius Caesar and Augustus expanded fast and chaotically, and in 64 AD, a great fire burned nearly a quarter of the city to the ground. Although Nero has been both blamed for the disaster and accused of infamously fiddling while Rome burns for being at the theatre during the fire, other reports have him participating in the relief effort and actually paying for the reconstruction of the housing.
The history books, the successors, aren't very kind, and so we have a rather stilted image of Nero. But Nero was a person who modernized the city, gave it new infrastructure, gave it a new fire code.
After the big fire of Rome in 64, many areas became available to build on because the fire had destroyed most of Rome, so Nero took advantage.
For the first time, urban planning was applied to the chaotic city with wider streets and brick buildings. But Nero also carved out a huge area for a new palace, which extended onto the Opium Hill to the north, the Palatine Hill to the west, and the Caeline Hill to the south. He called it the Domus Aurea, the Golden House. Between the buildings stood a massive square pool. In the enormous entrance to the palace, he built a huge statue of himself as a colossus, a giant.
But over time, bit by bit, the Domus Aurea and the grounds around it were all dismantled. So we have very little to see.
When Nero was deposed shortly afterwards, the house was abandoned. And to further destroy any trace of their predecessor, successive emperors built on top of it. Roman architects had mastered the art of civil engineering, with bridges, aqueducts, and roads. And now, a space in the city's heart became available to build in.
Is done by teams of workmen that are very skilled. They've done this before. And this is ultimately something that is lost because we can't build something of this scale by hand. We do it with mechanized means and cranes and machines. This was all done by hand. This was all done by brute force and physical labor. And then when you're building your scaffolding, it's made out of wood. When you're hoisting up material, it's cranes that are made of wood with metal pins and ultimately ropes that are made by hand. This is how you build the Colosseum.
The Forum stands in a valley beneath the Palatine Hill, where the imperial palace was. The palace dominated the Circus Maximus, the main chariot racing stadium, and today the venue for political rallies, soccer celebrations, and rock concerts.
The Circus Maximus was enormous. It could accommodate hundreds of thousands of spectators at a time. Last built in its final phase by the Emperor Trajan, which is partially excavated, but it extended for over 500 meters.
Overlooking the Circus Maximus were the spectacular emperors' palaces, from where they had the best view of the entertainment and could interact with the Roman public below.
It was a great opportunity to communicate, and over time, the emperor always had a palace with a circus, also in Constantinople.
To the west of the palace was Nero's pool, which was to become the site of the Colosseum. Vespasian found the coffers of Rome empty and turned to a shocking expedient to fill them again. He made Romans pay to use the public urinals.
And he was rather practical. So you can imagine, for example, when he says, let's tax the public lavatories, so that if you're going to the bathroom, you got to pay a fee. This is the kind of practical benefits that he is all about. A lot of people don't really agree with that at the time, but he says, you know what? This is what we have to do. Every single penny makes sense.
When his children complained and said, "My God, Dad, no, but why? It's disgraceful. But you can't put a tax on urinals. It is scandalous." Vespasian took a sesterces, a coin, and threw it at his son and said, "Non olet. It doesn't smell."
Nero's artificial lake was the perfect foundation for Rome's new amphitheatre, and work began in 70 AD to build the arena the imperial capital deserved. At the foot of Vespasian's residence, and a stone's throw from the Forum.
Before the Colosseum, you have a long history of various locations in Rome used for gladiatorial spectacles. The earliest documented use is in the Forum Boarium of the cattle market in 264 BC. But ultimately, through the Republic, it's really in the Roman Forum itself that you have the occasional games held temporarily.
Vespasian understood perfectly that the right time had come to build something really big. Think about a work site the size of the Colosseum, how many jobs it gave, the demolishing of the area, the recovery of the pool for building, the building materials transported there.
The stone used to build the Colosseum is Travertine, an ancient type of limestone rock formed hundreds of thousands of years ago from the calcium carbonate deposits of ancient sulfur warm springs. As the climate changed and the springs dried up, Travertine was left behind. Its special qualities made it perfect for the grand monuments of ancient Rome.
Travertine geologically has holes, which are technically called vacuoles. They are resistant to water. They do not absorb water. They can hold water like a glass, but the water remains. This is extraordinary. Here is the limestone, as if we were in a cave with stalactites and stalagmites. It helps you understand that the hole is rich with limestone, so it cannot absorb water.
These quarries in the hills of Tivoli near Rome have been providing the raw material for buildings and statues since the very earliest times. Until very recently, Travertine was almost exclusively quarried in Italy. Today it is mined worldwide, but Italy has been perfecting the extraction process for 2,000 years. Alessandro Dandini da Silva works in Fratelli Pacifici quarries, one of the largest Travertine quarries in Italy.
There are other quarries in the world, Mexico, China and Turkey, our biggest competitor in Europe. But here in Italy we have the highest capacity for extraction, and nobody has been able to do it quite as well. The principal area in Italy is Tivoli, the same place that the Romans quarried stone for the Colosseum and the other monuments of Rome more than 2,000 years ago.
Although Travertine looks porous, it is also extremely hard and polishes up to look like marble, although its chemical constitution is more like limestone.
The qualities of this stone are its easy working characteristics and strength as a construction material. It is an extremely solid stone, but at the same time not very hard to work, like, for example, marble.
We can say with certainty that the surface of the Colosseum was like this. The surface was left rough and grainy on purpose. This was a monument for the public, for spectacles, games, so the surface had this roughness, while the monuments made for the emperor or dedicated to the gods were made of marble, smooth, shiny, and reflective of the sun.
But how exactly did the Romans mine and cut the Travertine and then transport the massive blocks of stone to the Colosseum construction site in the heart of Rome?
The Romans had the quarry near the Agnene River, which was convenient because they loaded the Travertine blocks onto boats that could be floated all the way down to Rome.
The first challenge the Roman engineers faced was to get the building materials to the construction site, which in itself was a massive transport operation. From the Tiber River, the stone had to be moved to the heart of the city, where at last Vespasian's grand plan could be put into action. Building the Colosseum was the culmination of the career of Emperor Vespasian, and what he built still stands 2,000 years later. Today, one of Italy's noted industrialists has stepped in to preserve it for future generations. Workers are busy scrubbing the grime off the white Travertine facade, which is only now starting to divulge many new secrets. Dawn rises on the Colosseum under restoration. Men and women are already at work cleaning the facade. The view from the highest point gives a unique perspective on the engineering of how the world's largest amphitheatre was constructed. Travertine is extremely resistant to water and has provided support for the rest of the Colosseum structure for 2,000 years. The job entrusted to Conti and her team is not only to restore the ancient glory of the stonework, but also to ensure it has remained impermeable and, where it is fractured, make it waterproof once again.
With a resin hammer or with the wooden handle, we check the whole surface to see if the fragments are in situ, stable. We do it using percussion and sound, like a doctor listening to lungs, but also using tactile sensations, because when we put our hand on the stone, we can feel the difference in the vibrations and the extent of any detachments.
Fa sentire la vibrazione e l'estensione dell'eventuale distacco.
Over the centuries, various kinds of materials have been used to repair the Colosseum. Today, restorers are using stucco made of a mix of limestone and marble powder, which they have determined will best match the ancient stone.
We don't use travertine powder, which would have been coherent as an idea, because aesthetically, travertine powder creates an opaque paste when dried. So we use marble powder. Now I will show you the dried powder, and you can see a variety of the colors we use, so that the workers have a range of hues to arrive at the same color as the limestone.
The stone changes color naturally over time, so cleaning it also means not destroying the natural color of the original, which has been subject to weathering. Every step needs to be monitored so as to avoid turning the monument into an unnaturally white color. Cleaning between the stones is delicate and time-consuming.
This layer that seems to have some tonal discontinuity in the ivory white of the travertine represents, however, the passage of time. It is like my grey hairs from my black hairs. It is an aesthetic choice. I can dye my hair. I can also dye the hair of the Colosseum. We have to allow the visitor to understand that time has passed.
The patient and laborious work of cleaning and restoring the facade of the Colosseum is barely the beginning of the massive renovation project. Just as getting the travertine stone to Rome was just the first step in building the biggest arena of the Roman Empire.
They used the large depression caused by the lake to build the foundation, which was an enormous structure, an elliptical structure with a central space, a sort of donut-shaped foundation layer 13 meters wide.
In all, it took 10 years for Vespasian and his sons, Titus and Domitian, to build the massive arena, which was called the Flavian Amphitheatre, after their family name. Although Vespasian died just 2 years before the massive job was done, this great Roman general's legacy has survived to this day.
It was absolutely a short time if you think about the square meters of structure built, and considering the tools and equipment that they had access to.
Once inside the Colosseum, engineers used the existing inclined planes inside the cavea to haul slabs of travertine to the highest parts. While slaves did much of the heavy lifting, experts believe specialized artisans were overseeing the work.
You can have slaves that can be employed as stone carvers or whatnot for something specific and technical, but it just wasn't convenient for the state to have slaves or employ slaves for this kind of activity. The work, the building of Rome, is done by soldiers, is done by associations and groups of carpenters and masons and so forth that could have slaves. But again, this is not a city that's built by slaves.
4 different companies are believed to have been contracted to build the Colosseum, working simultaneously on different segments. Architects have studied the joints where the different construction companies' segments came together. And inside the monument itself, we see different engineering solutions applied to the same problem. The goal was to build this giant building as fast as possible, not to make it particularly elegant or beautiful.
They believe the work was divided in sectors and given to different construction companies that worked at the same time. In various points, we see these joints. There are several places where the arches are deformed, with their heads at different heights. And you can see that this is where the different teams came together.
Roman engineering had already performed the miracles of the aqueducts and the Roman roads, and although no designs of the Colosseum have emerged, the basic principles of Roman architecture had been codified.
The arch was introduced by the Etruscans, but the Romans understood its potential and used it everywhere, such as in aqueducts and bridges. The arch is a great structure because with a small amount of material you can cover large spaces. The arch works because it creates a horizontal force between the blocks that is compensated for when they touch the ground.
The strength of crossed arches was already known to the Romans. There were 2 kinds of arches involved in the Flavian amphitheatre: the barrel vault, made of Roman concrete and bricks, which was built using wooden molds, and the crossed arch in Travertine stone. The distribution of forces gave these arches incredible strength, especially when supported by adjacent arches. Roman concrete was more resistant than its modern equivalent, because its component parts solidified when wet. The arches, the concrete, and the travertine all worked together to make the Colosseum extremely solid.
In the Colosseum, the horizontal forces that each arch creates is compensated for by the next arch down. So every arch compensates the forces generated by the neighboring arch.
The building was held together thanks to geometry. These huge columns are made of great blocks of stone, and the interplay of arches keeps the whole structure standing.
The solid structure that has survived to this day is not only the result of the advanced Roman engineering techniques, but also shows signs of their very practical application to speed up the building work. For 2,000 years, the Colosseum has defied the ravages of time to remain standing. But it won't last forever without regular maintenance and key structural repairs, which are finally being carried out today, thanks to a unique public-private partnership for its restoration. The construction techniques used for the Colosseum are the same as those used in Capua and Verona, The internal surface of the building is covered in brickwork, which functions as a lining for the stone structure, adding uniformity, support, and lightness.
From this viewpoint, you see the exterior grand height of the Colosseum, which has disappeared on the side. It's been damaged by an earthquake. That material has been carted off. We get a view into the interior ring, also travertine stone, but then it peters out and becomes brick. That's been reconstructed. So when you look at the Colosseum, you're getting all kinds of different views into the history and the reconstruction, the shoring up and the stripping out of this grand monument.
This is where one construction segment meets another. The difference in the stonework is clear to the naked eye.
The Romans were very pragmatic. They paid attention to detail only where it could be seen. Wherever there were places that couldn't be seen or wouldn't be noticed in the overall building, they didn't spend too much, because precision has a cost.
The interior of the Colosseum is different. It's not travertine stone, it's the brickwork, but the brickwork is clad in marble. So the marble veneer has all but disappeared, but you can imagine the entire interior space shining with marble. The top of the Colosseum still visible today, and you can see a lot of the stonework, its place. It looks a little not quite so neat. From the exterior of it, of course, it's perfectly carved and wonderful and well organized. But on the inside, it wasn't going to be on view. That particular arrangement of the stone blocks, so they're not cut to the perfection that they could have done. No one's going to see that part, so who cares? We see it today exposed, and we ask questions.
The inside arches betray the junction of the segments. The way the barrel vaults are built can be seen clearly here. The brickwork would have been supported by wooden molds that held the bricks and mortar together until dry.
The construction of amphitheatres, not only of the Colosseum but of all theatres and amphitheatres, was made possible by the massive use of Roman cement, concrete that allowed the Romans to build barrel vaults in series, such as those you can see in the amphitheatres.
The stones were laid one on the other without cement, so the masonry had to be extremely precise.
Today when you go inside, it's been partially reconstructed. Now there's even the idea to reconstruct all of it, to allow more access to explore and experience the Colosseum. But in ancient times, it's all wood. And then you have the trapdoors, and up pop the protagonists, the gladiators, and many of the wild animals.
Historians believe the format for Roman games involved animal hunts in the morning, executions of criminals at midday, and gladiatorial combats or recreations of famous battles in the afternoon and evening. The big stone structures down below in the foundations held up the lighter structures above, where the public sat to watch the games. As the arches rose upwards, the construction materials used were lighter and lighter.
The Colosseum is held up by travertine stone, which are the travertine columns, and it becomes lighter as the structure rises to the upper floors. So the heaviest part is the first level, because it holds up the whole of the upper floors that right now are missing.
The entire amphitheatre was richly decorated in marble and bronze, with statues in every arch. The whole Colosseum was capped with a sail-like awning to shelter the spectators from the sun. It was held up by ropes and poles, resting on ledges all around the construction, each with its own drain to stop the wood rotting in the rain.
It can't fall inwards because the radial walls resist inward horizontal pressure, while forces that are pushing outwards are more problematic because there are no outer structures. That's why the Colosseum is not cylindrical but slightly conical and gets narrower towards the top. And this means that the center of gravity of the stone masses are displaced inwards, and this makes outward collapse more difficult.
This is where the less affluent people of Rome would watch the battles in the arena. But even then, they would still be no further than 60 meters from the combat. In 80 AD, the Emperor Titus inaugurated the great arena, with lavish inaugural games and feasting that lasted more than 100 days. Exotic animals were transported from the wilds of Africa for special hunts, and the best fighters were called into service as entertainment.
Weeks, months of continuous games, thousands of animals killed, hundreds of men to fight in that arena. But there is one story in particular of two gladiators who get called out of retirement to come back and fight for this big event. A bit like if we were to inaugurate a stadium today, if we were to call back Pele and Beckenbauer.
At the time of Titus' inaugural games, the cellars were built of wood, not of brickwork. They were made of wood so that they could be dismantled. The arena stage taken down for sea battles and then rebuilt for the gladiatorial combat and the animal hunts.
The games that would go down in history as the most lavish, however, were those held by Trajan when he celebrated the conquest of Dacia, today's Romania.
The most spectacular games were Trajan's celebration of the conquest of Dacia, which lasted 120 days and over 25,000 gladiators fought each other.
The Colossus statue of Nero was preserved, and Hadrian had it moved from near his palace to a place by the amphitheatre. It was the Romans' memory of that massive sun god statue that gave the Flavian amphitheatre its nickname, the Colosseum.
Just off to the left, where you see a couple of little cypress trees, there stood the Colossus. It was an enormous statue. We're talking about the size of the Statue of Liberty, except for the arm was not upraised. It was resting on a pillar. Over time, when we hear of it no more, authors start to call the Flavian amphitheater the Colosseum.
The last use of the Colosseum that we know of comes after an edict by Honorius in 404 AD. And here too, let's remember that there is no perfect recipe for a good gladiator, for a good amphitheatre, for the beautiful battle. We are talking about a practice that began in the 3rd century BC and that ended at the end of the 5th century AD. An incredibly long space of time.
In a Colosseum that the sources tell us was already partially buried by the events of time, battered by earthquakes, fires and lightning, and the removal of marble, in 528 AD, at the time of the Longobards in Rome, a hunt is organized. This hunt in 528 in the Colosseum was the last recorded event of its kind.
As Rome declined, the Colosseum was put to many uses. As here at the Theatre of Marcellus, houses were built inside the structure, but they did not stay for long. The Colosseum was rich in resources, which over the years would be pillaged and reused in other ways.
If you look at the stone on the exterior, you see the Travertine blocks oftentimes have holes in them, and those holes tell the tale of people in the Middle Ages extracting the metal pins that were originally joining one block to another block. So in the end, this large abandoned site is becoming a quarry. It's becoming a free shopping mall, and people are coming and taking material that they can use again.
The molten lead that held the stone blocks together was hacked out. Travertine was burned in lime kilns to make mortar. The urine of horses stabled there eroded the stone for use as saltpeter and gunpowder. Worse was to come.
When we look at the exterior of the Colosseum, we don't see that massive 50-meter-high exterior around the entire structure. It only exists on one side. What about the other side? What happened? A massive earthquake. And a large section here on one side tumbles down in the middle of the 14th century. So by the time we get into great documented periods like the Renaissance, we read about cartloads of material being taken from this job site or this ruinous site over to St. Peter's facade, hospitals, bridges.
Palazzo Venezia was built for the cardinals of Venice in the 1500s with stones from the Colosseum. They were also used for the loggia of the city of Rome's cathedral, San Giovanni in Laterano, as well as today's French embassy, Palazzo Farnese. Finally, the Colosseum was saved when Pope Benedict XIV declared it a monument to Christian martyrs. No one could touch it any longer. Although coal fires and traffic quickly covered the white facade with a soft black layer of soot.
L'attenzione di questo cantiere è quella di...
The goal of this worksite is not only to take away the deposit of black soot, but also identify all the cracks and create a single map. This has never been done. There's a difference between a small crack at this height and a long crack that goes up to the top. We have to see if it goes all the way up.
The layer of black grime led previous restorers to use dark cement to fill in the holes and cracks in the facade. Dr. Conti must renovate the renovations of the past.
Much of the stucco laid in those years, the 1950s and 60s, is black. Not because the restorers of the time were incompetent or colorblind, but simply because we have to imagine that the surface was black. They returned the color and integrated the stone with black filling, the color of the stone and its dirty surroundings.
The world's most famous monument is not only getting a clean-up, but is also due to be modernized inside and out, amid a storm of controversy. Restorers are hard at work with nebulizers, brushes and sponges, cleaning away the grime of centuries. Renovation is due to take 2 years, and the problems that face the ancient amphitheatre before it can be fully opened to the public are still many.
Doing conservation work on a site like the Colosseum is going to be multifaceted. It's not just one issue. You've got to always worry about water infiltration. Here on this hillside overlooking the Colosseum, you see what happens over time is that water is going to run off, and that runoff can eventually lead to a collapse. Occasionally, you'll have seismic activity, you have the threat of earthquake, so you have ongoing threats. And of course, you have traffic, you have pollution, but you also have a metro line passing underneath, you have the cars and the metro that are creating more seismic activity.
Naturally, the vibrations of the heavy traffic or the irregularity of the frequency of the vibrations can produce problems for the surface only if the surface is already weakened.
Some of the most advanced monitoring of water infiltration and seismic activity inside an ancient Roman arena is already being done in Verona, to the north. Here, the Romans had designed every seat, every stair, so that water would run off into a complex system of drains.
The Romans had designed the seats very differently in that the way the seat was carved reduced the points of contact, and at the edges there was a small protuberance carved into the stone to stop water filtering under it.
But when the later engineers in Verona replaced the damaged marble seating, they left gaps that allow water to seep through.
This situation was not respected when replacing the material, and consequently, from this kind of placement, we have serious problems today. The water infiltrates and goes and damages the arches, threatening to erode the material.
We are only filling up the larger cavities that threaten to let rainwater through the stone facade into the area of the barrel vaults, which are the true weak point of the monument that need to be protected from water and vibrations.
Quelle volte devono essere sempre protette dall'acqua e dalle vibrazioni.
Any damage to the Roman mortar that holds up the barrel vaults poses a mortal threat to the whole structure.
Non c'è più un tetto nel Colosseo, quindi
There is no longer a roof on the Colosseum, so the water enters. But we try to maintain the floors below, that are the roof of the arches that are beneath. Aside from the nebulization, as we turned on the tap to wash, we also stuck a surgical tube in every hole to see if it went through.
tubo di caucciù con l'acqua in ogni foro per vedere se c'era una continuità.
The delicate work of gently hammering the stone to find empty spaces is time-consuming. Once identified, the hole behind the facade has to be filled up with marble stucco to make sure water does not filter through to the vaults and further damage them, as they remain the structure on which the whole of the Colosseum still stands.
La stuccatura che qui è stata effettuata.
The stucco done here, as you can see, has a different color tone from the ones we saw before, because it is getting close to the true amber color of the Travertine.
Al colore ambrato del Travertino.
Once the job of consolidating the Colosseum is completed, the next step will be to decide what to do with it. The city of Verona has more than a century of experience using its arena for modern events. They have struck a balance for making necessary repairs to the monument while making healthy returns for the city.
The Verona opera season is an important source of revenue for the whole city. We're talking about 450 million euros of turnover associated with all the activities of the foundation.
But most stage managers aren't accustomed to holding events in a structure 2,000 years old. City and government officials are responsible for preserving the monument and also protecting the spectators.
Our experience acquired over the years is that the organizers of events born for stadium environments are not flexible in adapting them to archaeological sites, such as the arena.
Indeed, over the years, the whole of the arena, almost as large as the Colosseum, has been rendered safe and functional using sensors like this, placed in cracks in the vault under the public seating to register the slightest movement. The system set in place is the most advanced of its kind.
Monitoring the structure is done through instruments set up in the arena aimed at verifying the static and dynamic behavior of the amphitheater.
Just a few days after the system became operational, the city of Verona experienced an earthquake registering 5 on the Richter scale. To his delight, the team were able to verify the mathematical models used to build his system.
The earthquake was quite large, but did not damage the structure of the arena.
Later, his team were able to verify the effects of rock concerts in the arena and reassure the Culture Ministry that this precious monument was safe.
Era sotto il dubbio che I livelli sonori emessi potessero in qualche misura creare.
There was a doubt that the sound levels could create problems with the structure, but with this system, we could see that in any situation, the level of disturbance, such as from the sound levels during the concerts, was in any case smaller than that registered in the earthquake.
In a rare visit to the tunnels under the cavea, Mr. Menon illustrates how the Verona arena worked.
We don't have traces of how the animals and scenography were put onto the stage, but we know that this space did have two semicircular niches where there was a lift and pulley system.
Today, this system of cables and rods keeps the floor stable under the orchestra pit, making the arena suitable for concerts. So far, the Colosseum has not reaped the benefits of show business. But one day, the Colosseum cavea could be covered too, and concerts and events held there.
The new floor could be used for cultural initiatives, so this could give the monument a greater value to the public, enrich its use and its relationship with the public.
In fact, whole new areas of the Colosseum that were not accessible to the public before are going to be opened for tours after renovation is complete.
The total renovation of the cellars will allow us to open them to visitors, which will be limited to small groups because it is a labyrinth-like structure that requires a guide.
As the rest of Rome gets a facelift thanks to private money, restoring and using the holy grail of Roman monuments for marketing and promotion is subject to controversy.
I think private companies get the fame, get the recognition, it's getting publicity. So TODs, you hear this over and over again because of what they're doing in association with the Colosseum.
The Colosseum Restoration Accord calls for not just restoration, but also other initiatives, such as the establishment of a non-profit organization, Friends of the Colosseum, which will operate the external aspects, such as managing the monument.
The agreement on the Colosseum allows for the creation of a non-profit organization called Friends of the Colosseum. And this association has actually been created to help the spread of cultural activities around the Colosseum.
Friends of this organization, Friends of the Colosseum, Friends of the Louvre, and so on, and they're recognized as individuals and as organizations because they too want to help preserve this world heritage. It's not easy.
We are going to build a help center that will take out the activities that are at present inside the monument that aren't really compatible with the monument, such as a small bookshop, the ticket office and toilets. Clearly, we can't create large enough spaces within the monument, while outside the monument we will have more space to help the visitors that we know are at least between 5.5 million and 6 million a year.
Diego Della Valle is the CEO of TODS Group, an Italian manufacturer of shoes and leather goods who has long been tempted to enter the political arena. The maverick shoemaker struck a deal with the Italian Culture Ministry that allows him to use the Colosseum as a marketing tool. However, he denies any such intention, and indeed thinks more private entrepreneurs should be trying to help the Italian state at this difficult time.
I would advise my friends, the Italian entrepreneurs, if they haven't already thought about it, to take a minute to think about what they can do for this country. Because if we do things as entrepreneurs, it has a practical effect, because things get done.
The sponsor, who in this case is Della Valle, or whoever else it might be, wouldn't have been able to give more, doesn't necessarily have to give more, because what is made available is the cost of the work to be done. It doesn't have to cover the entire monument. Nobody gave away the Colosseum in terms of image or property to anyone.
Of course, the Colosseum remains the property of the state of Italy. Nothing has been sold. And private sponsorship doesn't take over the protection and monitoring and so on of the Colosseum. The ultimate decision and the ultimate control remains in the hands of the Ministry of Culture and the superintendencies. As long as that happens and you have the transparency so people know where the funds are going, I think it's a win-win situation for everybody.
One thing everyone can agree on, however, is the pressing need to preserve what is perhaps the most iconic and haunting image of ancient Rome. The Colosseum is one of the wonders of the ancient world, and still stands 2,000 years after it was built. Amphitheatres like this one were venues for gladiatorial entertainment in every Roman city of the empire. There were no less than 230 in the four corners of the Roman world. Rome's Colosseum is the largest arena still standing today. But it is in need of imminent repairs. Man and nature have eroded vast portions of the monument, though it still attracts millions of admirers every year. Restorers are diligently cleaning and consolidating the ancient arena, taking care not to destroy the marks of history. Beneath the floor of the Roman arena was the empire's most powerful propaganda machine, the equipment used for stunning visual effects that wowed the public over and over.
The Colosseum's underground cellars represent the emperor's machine for illusions. Obviously, the scenery was impressive, just as the shows which were given to the citizens by the emperors to maintain or to increase their popularity were spectacular.
The challenges of opening this maze of tunnels and niches to the public, however, are enormous.
Before restoring the cellars of the arena, a lot of work needs to be done. Above all, draining the waters. We must never forget that there's a river that runs under the Colosseum, and the water floods the Colosseum when it rains heavily.
The controversy surrounding the private funding of urgent restoration work on the monument has opened a whole new discussion on how Italy manages its cultural heritage.
All our clients, when they buy our products, somehow they also contribute to the renovation of the Colosseum.
Private sponsorship is not the solution, it is a solution. And it's a great solution. But there are so many other things that need to happen and can happen. Hopefully, with this private sponsorship, it's jump-starting the conversation, getting more people involved, more levels of participation involved. That's what I'd like to see.
Italy holds 3/4 of the world's great works of art. And yet, in the throes of economic crisis, the Italian state is expected to maintain this cultural heritage of the whole of humanity alone.
In such a difficult moment for our country, for the whole world economy, but also in Italy, I'd say that the situation we see is very worrying, and we hope it will pass. Well, in moments like this, the most famous people, the strongest companies, I think they should place themselves at their country's disposal. They should do what they can, and they should do it without asking for anything back. The message is, what can we do for our country today?
Across Italy, major monuments in need of repair are being restored with the help of discreetly branded sponsorship. The iconic Trevi fountain, made famous in the Fellini film La Dolce Vita, is today covered in scaffolding, and workers are chipping away at calcium deposits to reveal the original sculptures. Again, a major fashion house made the restoration possible. The Colosseum is no different. say those who support the initiative.
If you maintain it, if you invest in it, if you shore it up, because it does need help, this won't stand here forever on its own, you will have something that can be around as long as, you know, humans are around. But you need that investment, you need that care, and the Colosseum is finally getting it.
Given the sheer breadth of Italy's cultural heritage and the dire need of protecting it for future generations, a new law was passed in 2004 allowing for several new types of public-private partnerships.
In realtà il coinvolgimento del privato nelle iniziative pubbliche.
In actual fact, the role of the private comes in two forms, either via a donation or via a sponsorship. Surely the sponsorship of the Colosseum is one of the best examples of this.
È uno dei più grandi esempi dal punto di vista proprio della tipologia sponsorizzazione.
If every big Italian brand adopts a monument, very soon there could be renovation work all over the country, lightening the load on the staff of the Cultural Ministry. The question is how far the sponsors will be allowed to go to recover the investment in global communication. As far as the Cultural Ministry is concerned, the issue is simple. What will it cost to get the job done?
Il finanziatore della Valle, lo sponsor, ha contribuito.
The entrepreneur della Valle, the sponsor, contributed a sum of 25 million euros, which is the sum needed to carry out all the work that had to be done to save the facade of the monument, to create a welcome centre and to do the work inside the monument. It was budgeted at 25 million euros, so what the sponsor offered is exactly the sum that needs to be spent to do the work.
What I would like is to be recognized as having shown that the time has come to stand up and work for our country and not complain.
Restoring one of the wonders of the world is no small feat. But it is not the first time the Colosseum has been restored or rebranded, and probably won't be the last.
The restorer is like a doctor and serves society to maintain the monument memento over time, and this gives enormous satisfaction.
Never forget the prophecy of the Venerable Bede, an English monk who said, "As long as the Colosseum stands, Rome will stand. When the Colosseum falls, Rome will fall. And when Rome falls, so will the world."
Cadrà il mondo.
The whole story of the world's most famous stage is a constant work in progress, an ongoing saga of epic proportions.